The delegation sent 40 ships. We sent one scientist. I want to be clear about one thing before I tell you any of this. I was not supposed to be there. I was attached to Bethel Joint Reception Station as a civilian language consultant, which is a title that sounds important until you understand what it actually means, which is that I cataloged subharmonic vocalization records, cross-referenced them against treaty protocol databases that hadn't been updated in 11 years, and occasionally fixed the coffee machine when Ensign DeVell couldn't be bothered. My security clearance was provisional. My desk was in a converted storage room. When the Sorathi fleet dropped out of transit and the station's proximity alerts started cycling, the first thing Commander Reith did was tell me to stay out of the way. I made tea instead. The Sorathi arrived in 40 ships. I want you to sit with that number for a moment, because the station did. 40 vessels. Not a scouting party, not a diplomatic courier, not a light escort. A formation. They cycled it in close enough that you could see the running light patterns from the viewport in the anteroom. A slow, deliberate wheel of blue-white, 40 hulls moving in practice synchrony. It was, I will admit, impressive. It was designed to be impressive. The Sorathi are very good at designing things to be impressive. Fleet leader Orith Koss transmitted on the open diplomatic channel approximately 6 minutes after arrival. He did not use a greeting. He used a formation identifier, which in subharmonic Sorathi protocol carries about the same social weight as a fist placed on a table. His translator rendered it into flat standard as something like, "We are present. We are sufficient. Acknowledge." Commander Reith acknowledged. Then he sent me the transcript and asked, very quietly over his earpiece, what I thought. I told him the formation identifier Koss had used was the one reserved for treaty-compelled arrivals, not voluntary diplomatic ones. He'd been ordered here. Whatever this negotiation was about, the Sorathi hadn't initiated it cheerfully. Reith filed that away and said nothing. He was good at filing things away and saying nothing. It was, in fact, his defining professional quality. The Sorathi delegation came aboard 2 hours later. There were 9 of them, senior officers by the shoulder ridge markings, and fleet leader Koss at the front. He was taller than I'd expected. Most Sorathi are the first time. They have a way of occupying a room that makes you acutely aware of your own dimensions. Koss looked at the receiving bay, looked at Reith's team of 4 uniformed officers and 2 aides, and then looked at me. I was sitting at the small table along the far wall with my satchel open and my notebooks out, and a cup of tea I'd managed to get from the mess before the delegation arrived. I was also, I should say, wearing the same rumpled civilian jacket I'd worn for the last 3 days, because nobody had told me the Sorathi were coming until approximately 40 minutes before they docked. Koss said something in subharmonic Sorathi that his translator rendered as, "This is the human diplomatic delegation?" Reith said yes. There was a pause. Then Fleet Leader Koss made a vocalization that his translator did not render, because it fell below the threshold the translation unit was calibrated to catch. I caught it. I had been calibrating my own ear to that threshold for 4 years. It was a Sorathi expression. There is no clean standard equivalent. That sits somewhere between a laugh and a sigh, in a register they use when they encounter something too small to take seriously. It is a dismissal. It is a very old one. I wrote it down. I write everything down. That is, in fact, the job. The negotiation began. I will not bore you with the full substance of it, partly because it was genuinely tedious, and partly because most of it was posturing. Koss presenting terms in the particular Sorathi mode that is technically a dialogue but functionally a recitation. He spoke. His aides shifted formation slightly each time he made a point, and outside the viewport the 40 ships continued their slow, patient wheel of blue-white light. The display never stopped. It was clearly meant to be present in the room, even when everyone in the room was pretending to look at each other. I took notes. I asked clarifying questions. I asked them in the specific register that Sorathi subharmonic protocol reserves for junior witness parties, a mode that communicates, essentially, I am recording this, and each time I did, Koss's eyes moved to me for just a moment before he continued. He didn't acknowledge the mode. He knew I was using it. He chose not to engage with the implications. That was his first mistake, and it was a very understandable one, because every other species in this sector had made it before him. The Sorathi subharmonic treaty protocols are ancient and extremely thorough, and almost nobody outside the Sorathi diplomatic corps has bothered to learn them in any serious depth, because they're genuinely difficult, and the Sorathi are usually very cooperative about conducting negotiations in standard, which sidesteps the protocols entirely. Almost nobody. Commander Reith caught my eye at one point during Kaas's third recitation block. He raised an eyebrow. I gave him the very slight nod that we had developed over 18 months of working adjacent to each other, which meant, I have this. Not I have this in a dramatic sense, just in the literal sense. I had the thing. I had been having the thing for 4 years in a converted storage room, and nobody had asked me about it. Kaas finished his terms. He let the silence sit for a moment in the way the Sorathi do, which is long enough to be uncomfortable and just short enough to be technically non-rude. Then he said, through his translator, "We will await your formal response within the next 6 hours, at which point we will withdraw and register the outcome with the compact office." I said, "That's going to be a problem." Everyone looked at me, including Reith, who had not heard me use that particular tone before, because I had not needed to use it before. I opened my satchel. I produced a compact filing. Paper, because paper is admissible in all contact zones regardless of relay status, and digital formats are not, and I set it on the table. Under Article 14 of the Sorathi Diplomatic Engagement Compact, I said, any negotiation conducted within a registered contact zone and recorded in the subharmonic witness mode requires a certified lexical signature from an accredited witness before either party may formally withdraw and register an outcome. I paused. I've been recording in subharmonic witness mode since the third question. I have a notation in my field records, and the notation is date time stamped to the station's reference clock. Kaas was very still. I'm the only accredited Sorathi subharmonic lexical witness currently operating in this sector, I said. I checked the registry this morning. It's updated quarterly. The room was quiet for long enough that you could hear, faintly, the ventilation system. The certification filing, I continued, requires both parties to acknowledge the record and countersign the witness log before the session is formally closed. The compact office doesn't accept and sign closures. They go into a dispute queue, and dispute queues in this sector run about 14 months. I picked up my pen, or we can revise the terms, work through any outstanding clarifications, and close the session in order. I can have the witness log ready within the hour. Fleet Leader Kaas looked at me for a long moment. Not the way he'd looked at me when he arrived. Not with that quiet, dismissive sound below the translation threshold. He looked at me the way you look at a piece of infrastructure you walk past every day without registering, and then one day you noticed what it was actually holding up. He said something to his aide. His translator rendered it as, "Retrieve the secondary terms document." The secondary terms document was, from what I could tell, considerably more reasonable than the first one. We worked through it in about 90 minutes. I asked clarifying questions in subharmonic witness mode throughout, which Kaas acknowledged properly this time. The 40 ships outside the viewport stopped their display pattern around the halfway point and settled in a standard docking hold. The light they made was much less dramatic, but a little easier on the eyes. I signed the witness log. Kaas countersigned it. His hand, or the closest Sorathi equivalent, paused for just a moment over the form, and he looked at the 4 years of field notes stacked in my open satchel, and I think he was doing arithmetic. He didn't say anything about it. Neither did I. The delegation departed. The 40 ships formed up and made transit about 2 hours later. Commander Reith stood at the viewport and watched them go, and then he turned and looked at me and said, "How long have you known about the lexical witness provision?" "Since my second year cataloging," I said. "It's in the treaty protocol database. The updated one." Nobody updated the database. "I did," I said. "About 8 months ago. I had some spare time." Reith looked at me for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he looked at my satchel. Then he looked back at me. "Is there more tea?" he said. There was. I'd made enough for 2.